Okay, here we go, Rabbi Isai. And I'm just going to bring up the here we go. There we are. Okay, now we all know that there is a mitzvah of kibbud av va'em, and we all know that there's an obligation to honor your parents and to heed them for when they ask you to do something. But how far does that mitzvah extend? Does it extend to my personal life? Does it extend to, my mother tells me, Sonny boy, I don't want you should drive a German car. Okay? Is it permitted for me to drive a German car? What if she tells me I don't want you should drive a Japanese car because they were friends with the Nazis? What if she says I only want you to drive American because the Americans were the good guys and I don't like American cars? What if she tells me that I have to live in a certain place? And so what are the parameters? How do we quantify to what extent we're obligated to heed what a parent's wishes? We're going to just try to quantify that one issue tonight, to isolate it. And what we're going to discover is that there are a few different interesting ways of characterizing the parameters of kibbud av va'em vis-a-vis following a parent's wishes. And our test case is going to be marriage. A parent tells, and I have to confess that I faced a couple of cases in the recent past of very, very difficult cases where the parents were at battle with the children. And there's one ongoing now also. And it really started to get me thinking, what are the parents' rights and what are the children's rights when there's a conflict where the parent says, I don't want you should marry that girl or that boy? And what are the rights of the child to go against the wishes of the parent? Okay. What if a parent says, I don't want you should marry that girl for another 2 years? You should finish school first. Do I have to listen to my parents? If I'm not asking them for any money, but they want me to finish my education. Okay, so let's take a look. We're going to learn a bit of lumdis in the Gemara, and that'll be our first stop. That'll be the hardest sort of limud that we're going to do together in the Gemara in tonight's discussion, and then it'll get progressively easier. We're in the middle of a Gemara in Yevamos, which is the Sugya of aseh doicha lo saseh, that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. And we're at a point in the Gemara where the Gemara is prepared to say, yes, I agree that when you have a conflict between a positive commandment and a negative commandment, and they're both regular, in other words, there's no major penalty involved in the non-compliance of the mitzvah, that normally an aseh is doicha lo saseh. A positive commandment to do something overrides a negative commandment. The Gemara gives a number of examples. But that's only aseh ashkechan da'asi aseh v'dochi lo saseh greda, a regular case. But lo saseh sheyesh bo kares heicha ashkechan dedachi de'itzterich aleha lemesra. See, the Gemara works with a pasuk. The pasuk in the Torah has the extra word aleha in the parsha of Arayos, talking about the prohibition of achos ishto, that I'm not allowed to marry my wife's sister. Now, what happens if my wife's sister falls to me for yibum? So I can do a positive commandment, but I would have to violate a negative commandment in the process. Am I allowed to do yibum with my sister-in-law? Could we argue that the positive commandment of yibum overrides the negative commandment of marrying my sister-in-law? And the Gemara says, no, it doesn't, based on the word aleha that is extra in the pasuk of achos ishto, which teaches me that I cannot do yibum with my sister-in-law despite the fact that it's a mitzvah. Now, the Gemara says, well, you're working under the premise that a positive commandment can even override a negative commandment that carries kares, because otherwise you wouldn't need the word aleha. You would just apply the regular rule that ein ase doche lo sase sheyesh bo kares. Are you with me so far? So the Gemara says you must be working under the premise that an asay can be doche even a lo sase sheyesh bo kares. Otherwise, you wouldn't need the word aleha. Where do you know this from? So the Gemara goes through a whole process. We're seeing a very shortened version of this Gemara. The Gemara says, "Itzterich salkadaita chamina teise mikibud av va'em." I would have thought that it would have been derived from honoring parents. The Torah says, "Detanya yachol yehi kavod kibud av va'em doicha Shabbos." You might think, says the Brisa, that the mitzvah of honoring your parents overrides Shabbos observance. Now, Shabbos observance is a lo saseh sheyesh bo kares. You might think that a positive commandment of listening to your parents overrides the negative commandment of observing Shabbos. Tamulomar ish imo va'aviv tira'u ve'es shabsoisai tishmoru. So I have a pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, which connects the commandment to honor your parents with the imperative of observing Shabbos. What we see from there is that even though I would normally think that listening to my parents overrides Shabbos, but I have a special pasuk that tells me that it does not, because of the principle of kulchem chayavin bichvodi. You Jewish people are all you and your parents are obligated to honor me, Hashem. And because of that, you can never rationalize listening to your parents over violating Shabbos. So the Gemara says, isn't this a great example of where we see that normally ases docha lo saseh sheyesh bo kares, and that's why I need a special pasuk to tell me that it doesn't apply in the case of kibud av va'em. My lav da omer leishchot li basheli v'taima de kosav rachmana es shabsosai tishmoru. So the fact is that, like I said, what if a parent tells his child, shecht for me on Shabbos, cook for me on Shabbos? I can't listen to them only because there's a pasuk. Halav hachi dachi. Were it not for the pasuk, I would have said that asay is dochelos asay sheyesh bo kares, even Shabbos violation. So you see from here, says the Gemara, what? That asay is dochelos asay sheyesh bo kares. Are you with me? Okay, try it. If you stay awake for the first 10 minutes of this year, I promise it won't be that hard, okay? But then the Gemara says, lav de machamer. No, this is not a proof that ases dochelos asay sheyesh bo kares, but rather it's telling me that if a parent wants me to only do a minor violation of Shabbos that does not carry with it an Isser Kares. That's why I need a pasuk. That even if a parent tells me, drive this laden animal, in other words, take an animal that is carrying a load on its back and lead it through the marketplace. That's a Torah violation, but it doesn't carry kares with it because I'm not doing it by myself. I'm just leading an animal. And I'm obligated to make sure that animals don't work on Shabbos, but it's not a kares violation of Shabbos. And that's why I need a pasuk. Normally, I wouldn't need a pasuk. So the Gemara says, "Va'afilu hachi lo dachi." Well, then why doesn't the positive commandment of a parent telling you to do it, why doesn't that override Shabbos? Let's learn from here that even a minor lo sa'aseh, a positive commandment cannot override. Shiny lav lave de Shabbos de chamiri. Maybe you'll tell me that Shabbos violations are more stringent, and that's the reason why I can't follow my parents because I always have to observe Shabbos. But there are other lo sa'asehs that I can violate. But normally, we always compare Shabbos to all other kinds of prohibitions. So I'm going to skip a couple of lines, and the Gemara says, "Ela mishum de'ika lemifrach ma lahanach shekain hechsher mitzvah." So the Gemara answers, no. Really, this is a different case because of Hechsher Mitzvah. Now, there's two different ways of understanding the Gemara's answer. I'm going to just speak out Rashi because I see that I'm not engaging with you because the Shakla V'Tarya is very difficult. So let me just cut to the chase. Rashi's understanding of the Gemara is not how most poskim understand this Gemara. Rashi just says that Hechsher Mitzvah means that my parent is telling me to do something that the only way that I can fulfill their wishes is by doing the violation of Shabbos. And perhaps that's the reason why I need a special pasuk. But it could be that for Yibum, I wouldn't need a pasuk because I would know that since I always have an option of doing chalitza, that's different. So with Shabbos, I need a pasuk to tell me that I can't violate Shabbos in order to listen to my parents' wishes, to cook or to shecht or whatever they want me to do. Because the only way that I can give them what they want is by violating Shabbos. But I shouldn't need a pasuk for Yibum because even though my sister-in-law, I have a mitzvah of doing Yibum, but I also have an option of doing chalitza, so I can fulfill the mitzvah without violating the losas. That's how Rashi writes. Comes along the Rashba, quoting Rabbeinu Hananel, and he has a totally different way of understanding, and this is what I want to extract. The Rashba's understanding is, what we're talking about is a case, skipping to source number 3. Source number 3 is the alav de machamer koi, kolomar la'olam belav de machamer. That really the case where the Torah says don't listen to your parent is when your parent only asks you to do a minor Shabbos violation. Maybe you'll say, well, then why don't we learn from here this as an exemplar that ein aseh docha lo saseh greda, that a positive commandment of listening to your parents does not override even a minor negative commandment. So the Gemara says, hacha de'ein bitulo ela hechsher mitzvah bilvad. Answers the Rashba based on the language of the Gemara, because what my parent is asking me to do in the violation of Shabbos is not the act of honoring my parent, but rather it's a hechsher mitzvah. Meaning my parent is asking me to cook something for them. Have I honored my parents if I make chicken soup for them on Shabbos? No, I've only done a preparatory step of giving my parents chicken soup to eat. But giving my parents chicken soup to eat is not the Shabbos violation. Cooking the chicken soup is the Shabbos violation. So the way the Rashba understands the Gemara is that the reason why you cannot learn from here that aseh is docha lo saseh is because maybe the only reason why I can't violate Shabbos is because the act of Shabbos violation is not concomitant with the act of honoring my parents. But perhaps in a situation where the act itself is the mitzvah, then perhaps aseh is docha lo saseh. That's the tamtzit of the Rashba. And the Rashba basically says, and this is really the main part we have to see, even if my father tells me to drive the animal on Shabbos, that I can't do. He says, honoring my father or mother is where I give them benefit. If my parent tells me, drive an animal through the marketplace for the purpose of getting the animal to me, or for the purpose of delivering some goods, then the violation of driving the animal is not providing benefit to my parent. It's only the finished act, which doesn't involve Shabbos violation, which is the act of honoring my parent. And the Rashba tells us a huge chiddush. It says that kibud av va'ein is limited to providing benefit to a parent, where the parent is getting direct benefit from my action. If I do something that my parent wants me to do, but it has nothing to do with my parent, it's a completely personal issue in my life, then from the Rashba we learn, and the Vilna Gaon says this as well, that that's not called kibud av va'ein. I haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of kibud av va'ein, and that's a big chiddush. Now let's take a look. Yeah, Simi.
But isn't the benefit the very fact you're listening to your parents? Is that an annoying itself?
That's what you might you might want to ask, but he calls it a hechsher kavod. He says you're only doing something to bring about an ultimate benefit to it. Has to be a tangible benefit to the parents, like you gave them chicken soup, or you brought them their slippers, or you helped them to their bed, in other words, it has to be a tangible benefit that is nogeya directly to the parent. Just the fact that they listen to me as a parent is not called enough of a hana to be called the mitzvah of kibbut avayim. So it's not enough, at least, to be docha a mitzvah lo sase. That's what we're seeing from this Gemara. Okay, from this Rashba, I should say. Yes. Yeah, nachas. Yeah. All good questions. Well, right. Okay. But what you see so far from this Rashba is that that's the reason why you cannot learn from this example of Ish imo ve'aviv tiro ve'shabsosai tishmoru that asay ein asay docha los asay. Because the only reason why the asay is not docha the los asay in this instance is because the act that I'm doing of Shabbos violation is not directly correlated to the kavod that my parent wishes for me to give them, which in this case may be bring the animal to my house, and I have to have the animal schlep something through a reshus harabim in order to get to my parents' house. The benefit is the animal being at my parents' house, but the malacha or the isser is the preparatory stage of moving the animal through the marketplace. Let's take a look at, now we've gone through the hard part, let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch in source number 4 tells us, it's in Yoredei and Hilchas Kibbut Avayim. So first of all, a tangential halacha, but we'll go through the whole sif. Im ha'av rotzeh l'sharet et habein mutar lekabel mimenu, ela im kein ha'av ben Torah. What if a father wishes to serve his son? It is permitted to accept service from a parent unless the parent is a Talmud Chacham, in which case it's usher to receive service from a parent. Next, Talmud shirotze lalechet lemakom acher. Let's say a ben Torah wants to learn in a certain yeshiva. Shehu boteach sheyireh siman bracha b'talmudo lifnei harav shesham. Because he hears that there's a Rosh Yeshiva in that place that is very matzliach in teaching, and he feels that he'll be more matzliach in his learning by going to Yeshiva X, even though his parent does not want him to go to Yeshiva X. Va'aviv mochebo lefisha doeg sheba'ota ha'ir ha'ovdei kolchavim ma'alilim. And the parent does not want the child to go there. Not because he's got anything against the yeshiva per se, but he feels it's a dangerous city to go for Jews. And he feels there's a lot of anti-Semitism there. I don't want you to go to a place where there's perhaps maybe violence against Jews. It's not safe. I don't feel comfortable for you to go there. One of I can't even say, I know a person whose mother did not want them to go to Eretz Yisrael for seminary because they felt it was too dangerous. And so they ended up going to Europe for seminary instead of Eretz Yisrael. Would it have been permitted? And the argument that the mother gave was, it's not safe in Eretz Yisrael because of all of the Arab terrorism. And you'd put my mind more at ease if I sent you to a European seminary instead of an Israeli seminary. Now, the question in halacha is, does the child have to listen to the parent, assuming that the child is independently wealthy and willing to pay their own tuition? Okay, so eino tzarich lishmoa la'aviv bazeh. The person does not have to listen to the parent. The child, if he feels he's going to be matzliach in another place, has every right to go there, even if it's against the parents' wishes. Well, that's the question. What is the reason? We haven't seen the reason yet. But if we're going to use the Rashba's Mahalech, The mitzvah of kibbud av va'em applies to providing benefits to a parent. No, it's for anything, right? If a parent asks me to do something which impacts my own personal life, but doesn't impact my parent, at least not directly, other than perhaps the emotional issues, they'll be more worried, they won't be able to sleep at night. But I'm still allowed to live my own life without having to worry about my parents' concerns. That's what the Shulchan Aruch is saying here. Let me just finish with the Ramah. And the Ramah finishes by saying, "V'chein im ha'av mocha beben lisa ezo isha shiachpotz ba'aben." And similarly, if a parent protests and says, "I don't want you should marry that girl," then ein tzarach lishma el ha'av, you do not have to listen to the parent. Go ahead, Eddie. Very, very traumatic. What if my father does not want me to marry that girl, and it's going to bother him and it's going to eat his kishkas up? What did you just see in the Shulchan Aruch? Listen, a parent could say anything to guilt a child into doing their wishes, right? You're tearing out my kishkas. You're making me crazy. I'm going to be committed to an insane asylum if you do go ahead and marry this girl. So, what is medicine? What are you? I just said, even if the parent is going to claim mental illness, and even if they are going to be mentally ill as a result, right? Unless you feel that it's mamish sakanas nefashos, maybe you could make that argument that it's going to create a sakana. Very hard to make that argument, though, Eddie. Although, because especially in today's world, everything is so subjective in psychiatry, right? Okay. Wait a minute. Okay. Now, we have to understand what the rationale for this halacha is. The Maharik gives actually three reasons, and he's the source of at least the Ramaz halacha about marriage. And I just figured that there was a very interesting hakdama. It's a very long tshuva. We're only seeing a very small snippet of it. The Maharik lives in the 15th century. He's one of the Rishonim. And he says, he starts off the tshuva by saying, Lamazeh tishal lishmi, ish briti, gam ish shalomi, vilchom belachmi uveveiti, and lechem v'simla. He says, why did you come to me with this shaila? You're so far, and he writes poetically, you're so far superior to me. I have no bread and fabric in my house, and you have such abundant wealth of knowledge. Lahashiv dvar halacha filu b'maseches kala b'tayadat kula. He says, you know so much more than I do. You know even the most obscure aspects of Talmud. Ach, anotcha simachtani v'ruach kodshecha netaltani lechavod dei. But he says, you asked of me and you wanted to know my thinking. Gamani rishona al odot Reuven shenishba le'aviv shelo yisa isha milbalti rishuto. So the following case comes to this rabbi who's asking the Ma'arika Shaila. He says, a son took a vow that he would not marry anyone without getting his father's permission. Took a vow, a literal vow, like a shavua, okay? Uveterem nishba alav kvar masar moda'a bifnei edim levatel shavu'asa. But before he took the vow to his father, he went over to two edim and said, I hereby nullify any vow that I take to my father. So, now why did he do that? Could be he needed a down payment on a house. Well, who knows what the reason is? But he did this in order to mollify his father, and at the same time did not want to be obligated to honor the vow. Sort of like making a promise with your fingers crossed. Okay, that's basically what he's trying to get away with. So, very underhanded, you would say, right? So he says, he says, you know because his argument to the witnesses is, I need my father to accompany to some far off place, and he's going to demand that I take a shvua that I can only marry a girl that he approves of, And if I don't promise him, if I don't swear to him, he's not going to accompany me to the place where I need him to come with me to. Maybe he's got to pay the fare on the ship. Who knows what the story is over here? And so Reuven goes ahead after taking the Shavua, the false Shavua, so to speak, goes ahead and presents Kiddushin to a woman, betroths a woman. And before he has a chance to consummate the marriage, his father says, I don't want you should marry that girl. There's a little bit of a wrinkle in the case that Reuven, there were already rumors that Reuven and this girl were intimately involved with each other. But it was just a rumor. There was not even circumstantial evidence. There was just a rumor. That's basically the way that the Maharik is presented the Shiur. What is the halachic obligation of Reuven? What are his rights? And what may he go ahead and consummate the marriage? So, Kedei Lamalo says, I'm going to present to you my feeble thoughts on this matter. And the first part of this major tshuva is to talk about how what Reuven did was not correct. He had no right to take a shvua. His moda'ah to be mavatal the shvua in advance does not work. And on that basis, he cannot go ahead and consummate the marriage with this girl. But in the course of answering this shaila, he does discuss, does a father have a right to demand that a son not marry a particular girl? So we're skipping to that part. As far as your question, does a father have a right to demand that his son not marry a particular girl that the son wants to marry? Lanius daiti nira she'im hi isha hahogenet lo she'ein koach biad ha'av limchot biad haben. So if, and this is a big if she's a nice Jewish girl, an Erlicha girl, a frum girl, a nice, like a really good girl, right? Like your future daughter-in-law, a really good girl, right? And for whatever reason, Robert got it in his head, some mishagas that he doesn't want the shidduch to go through. The son would not have to listen to the father. Now, why is that? Now, but what that implies, you see, if you read between the lines, what he's saying is, if the parents can say, I don't want you should marry that girl because she's not Shomer Shabbos, or because she's been playing around with the other boys and she's not pure, or for other reasons, maybe, let's say, that would cast aspersions on the character of the girl, that would be the basis for the father, let's say, even to take his son to a din Torah, perhaps, before the son goes ahead and marries the girl. But if the son can demonstrate that there's nothing wrong with this young lady, she's a fine character, she's a fine girl, you don't happen to like her parents, or you don't like the town where she comes from, or you don't like the way she looks, or you don't like this, she doesn't come from money, or whatever it is, you don't have the ability to be mevatel a shidduch arbitrarily for a baseless reason. And he gives now, and here the Maharik gives us three reasons, and let's focus very carefully on these three reasons. Aleph, chada, da'afilu le'inyan momon, odi le'rabonin le'reb Yirmiyah kamanda Omar Mishel Ha'av. We paskin that the mitzvah of kibbud av va'em does not extend to the child being obligated to expend his own money to honor a parent. If my parent says, feed me, then I have an obligation to feed the parent, but I can take the parent's credit card and charge it on their credit card. I am not obligated to incur out-of-pocket expenses to fulfill the mitzvah of kibbud av va'em. Now, that's a paskind halacha in Shulchan Aruch, but based on that, he says, kol shekain hacha. If so, then certainly a child is not obligated to incur a loss of a shidduch. If I'm not obligated to incur the loss of money, then I'm certainly not obligated to incur the loss of a shidduch, shehu davar hashayach b'tzare de gufa, lahaniach ha'isha asher chafetz ba, v'yitzarech lakachat isha acheret asher lo tiyasher be'inav kol kach. So what are you asking me to incur, Father? You want me that I should marry a different girl that I'm not going to love as much. It's going to cause me great heartache and great heartbreak to not marry the girl who I feel is my bashert because of your demand. If I'm not even obligated to spend money on you, Dad, how can you expect me to expend heartbreak on you? So that's argument number one that the Maharik makes. Good argument. You buy it, you don't buy it. Okay, argument number two. Va'od, the karov hadavar be'enai lihiyot kimitzvah la'avor al divrei Torah, kimitzaveh la'avor al divrei Torah. It's very analogous. When a parent says, I don't want you should marry that girl, it's basically all tantamount to a parent telling you, violate the Torah. And we know that whenever a parent tells you to violate the Torah, we say you don't listen to the parent. Because divrei harav, the divrei hatalmud, divrei mishomim, you always listen to the master, not to the parent who is the student of the master. He says, our rabbis tell us, you're not allowed to marry a woman unless you look upon her first, because she has to find favor in your eyes. He says, there are certain exceptions to that rule for other reasons which we won't go into, but what we do see from this is that there is a commandment, there is a mitzvah to only marry a woman that you fall in love with. Now, he doesn't literally say the words fall in love, but that you desire. There's only, you have a mitzvah to marry a woman that you love, not to marry a woman that your parents love. Okay? And there are many places where the rabbis express this concern that a woman should find favor in her husband's eyes, and they take measures to endear the woman to her husband. Im ha'av mitzavel beno shelo yedaber im ploni velo yimcholo al ma she'asalo ad zman katzuv shema ben rotze lahashlim shein lachush litzavo as aviv. He says, we already know the halacha, that if a father tells you, I don't want you should talk to that guy. He once spit on me when I was in shul. I forbid you to make shalom with him or to talk to him or to have nothing to do with him. Am I mechuyev to listen to my father? I'm not mechuyev to listen to my father. It is permitted for me to make shalom with another yid, even if it goes against my father's wishes. Why? Ipnei sha'aser lisno shum Yehudi. Kulei k'deisa b'tur yoredeya hachanami lo shna l'fi anira la'anius daiti me'acher sheyesh b'davar nidnud avera k'depirashti le'el. So when a parent says, I don't want that you should have anything to do with this girl, he's asking me to commit an avera. He's asking me to spurn the woman that I love, that is meant to be the woman that I'm supposed to marry, that I am so attracted to, that I so want to be with. And therefore, just like I don't listen to a parent who tells me to do an avera, I don't listen to a parent who tells me not to marry a girl. Yes. There, it's because it's not, the father's argument is you're not doing a mitzvah by marrying her. In other words, I'm not telling you to do an avera by not marrying her. I'm telling you, don't marry a girl who's not good. You're only, and the father's basically saying it's not a good shidduch. It's she's all wrong for you because she's going to corrupt you. And there's not a mitzvah for me to marry a girl who's going to corrupt me. What I have to do, though, of course, is I have to evaluate whether my father is correct. If, after listening to my father's advice, I come to the conclusion that my father is a little bit crazy in the head and he doesn't know what he's talking about, I don't have to listen to my father, even if he's a lamdan and he comes up with this idea that she's of poor character. I said, Dad, what are you talking about? What do you mean she's of poor character? What did she ever do to you or to anybody else? Well, one time I heard from this person who spoke to that person, that she didn't stand for kedusha in shul. So I don't like people who don't do that, and she's of poor character. She's not from. So come on, Dad. Come on, Dad. You're just trying. You're grasping at straws. Okay. When right, right.
Where is the fine line?
So anytime a child is an adult and is independent and is not dependent upon his parents anymore, then a child has complete autonomy when it comes to self-determination, when it comes to making up the decisions that will affect his life. And the Maharik has given us two reasons for this. Number one, I'm not obligated to incur agmas nefesh, personal heartache, and deprivation in order to accommodate a parent. Number two, I'm not supposed to do an aveira in order to honor my parents' wishes. And not marrying the girl of my dreams is an aveira in a case where she's of good character. Number three, va'od, da'ad kan lo miflagi im mishel av im mishel ben, ela b'davar d'shayacha av begava, parnasa sa'av. He says, let's go back to the Rashba. Remember, there's only a debate as to whether if a parent says, feed me, that the child has to expend his own money or not. Why? Because that involves kibud ava'im, where there's a direct benefit to the parent. But when the parent has no direct benefit regarding who the child is marrying, then clearly the parent does not have the right to protest against what the son is choosing to do. Now here, there's a little bit of vagary, right? Because what if the parent argues, your future bride hates me and hates your mother, and if you go ahead with this marriage, we're never going to see you again. She's going to pull you away from us, and we'll never see your grandkids, and we'll never this, and we'll never that. So there, I could hear an argument where the child should think twice before marrying the girl, if indeed that's true. Like if the girl has made it very clear, I hate your parents, I never want to look at them, I never want to talk to them, then maybe a parent could make the argument that that is nogeya to me. Separating my child from the parents is nogeya directly to me. But in a situation where the child, where that's not the case, where marrying a girl does not impact directly the hana to my parents, lo mishum kavod velo mishum morad lo shaykh kavod elakagon ma'achilu mashkeu malbisho manilo. He says, because the mitzvah of kavod is to feed a parent, to give them to drink, to dress them, to put their shoes on. Mora lo yeshiv mekomo below soser tvar mora of a parent, where you have to be in reverence, you have to revere a parent, is that you can't sit in their place, you can't contradict their words, etc. But when it's got nothing to do with the parent, a parent has no right to protest. So just to review the three arguments of the Maharik. Number one says the Maharik, a child is never obligated to incur financial loss and certainly not personal pain in the performance of the mitzvah of kibbud avayim. Argument number two, and of course that could be subjective. Like what if every time I go to my parents' house I get heartburn? Does that count as does that count as personal pain? Probably not. It goes back to Eddie's question about mental distress. I think not. In other words, I think it has to rise to a threshold of I'm going to be heartbroken because I couldn't marry the girl that I wanted to. So that, one second. This is reason number one. Reason number two is my parent, by telling me not to marry a person I'm in love with, is telling me to do an aveira. And I'm never allowed to do an aveira in the course of the mitzvah of kibbud avayim. And reason number three, there's no direct benefit to a parent regarding who I marry. And as a result, it's not even shaykh the mitzvah of kibbud avayim, and that's what we saw in the Rashba. Okay, what are you trying to say?
not gonna like him.
No, it's not a question of not liking me.
Never gonna see
He's-
me. I'm never gonna see my kids.
Your wife will prevent you from fulfilling the mitzvah of kibbud av va'em. That I think is a valid argument. In other words, there still is a mitzvah of machilo mashkeu. You have to feed a parent. If the parent asks for food, you have to, and she refuses to let me go. So in that situation, I think you can make the argument. Absolutely. We don't have time to look at the Pischei Tshuva, but he has an interesting shaila. The shaila that he asks is as follows. The Chavos Yair was asked the following shaila in source number 6. Shenishal be'isha shetzivta b'chol yakodem p'tirata livna. A woman is on her deathbed. She tells her son before she dies, Boychik, the apartment is yours, and I'm leaving you my condo. However, shelo yaskir beito lahaba l'shum adam, but you don't have permission to rent it out. I only want you to live in it. I don't want you to rent it out to anybody else. And then she passes away. The darbo b'schira shana zakein talmid chacham u'bal masim abein mechuyev l'kaim tzavas imo bazeh. And it turns out that already living in that condo is an old Talmud Chacham. And she said, I want you to make sure that this apartment is vacant. Is he mechuyev to evict the Talmud Chacham? That's the question that the Pischei Tshuva deals with, based on the issues that we've talked about before as to what the parameters, what the limits of kibbud av va'em. Take a look at Rav Baruch Ber in the Sefer Birkas Shmuel. He quotes the Rashba over here, and he says, "V'hadelo yalfinen mehacha de'ein asei dochalo sasehu mishum delo habirak hechsher mitzvah dechishim achamer." Okay, he quotes the Rashba that I said before, but the Rashba basically comes to the conclusion that the reason why you can't learn from this law of mechamer, where a parent asks you to ride an animal on Shabbos or to schlep the animal that is laden with a load on Shabbos through the marketplace, that you can't do it and learn from there that ein aseh dochelo saseh is because the thing that I'm doing to be mechawel Shabbos is not concomitant with the fulfillment of my parents' wishes of giving my parents hana'ah. Ba'ayin barashba v'zelashono, and he says, he quotes the Rashba. He says, Aval ein sarach lasos davar she'ein bo hana'ah shel klum ein ze kibud shenitztava oleha. The kibbud kazeh ein bo aseh shel Torah sheyitcha afilu lav greda v'chula ye'uyin sham. The Rashba says b'feirush that if a parent tells you to do something that brings them no immediate benefit as a result of that action, then that's not called kibbud av va'em, and therefore it would never override even a minor offense. Ubir dvarav hakdoishin, and the explanation of his holy words are the yeshnei ofanei kibbud. There are two types of kibbud av va'em. This is a huge chiddush of Rav Baruch Ber. Yeshna ofen echad shehu guf aseh shel Torah, v'im oiver al zeh havi mevatel mitzvah saseh. The first kind of kibbud av va'em is where a parent tells me directly to give them food or to give them something that it gives them direct benefit. And if I don't do it, I'm over on a mitzvah aseh. Zeo kibbud sheyesh bo hana'ah la'aviv. That's where I'm bringing direct benefit to my father. But the kibbud she'ein bo hana'ah klum, after havi gamkein bichlal mitzvah, the kibbud aval ein ze guf ha-mitzvah ba'ofen she'over al bitula. Zok Rav Baruch Ber, if, however, my parent tells me to do something that does not bring them direct benefit, like I don't want you should drive a German car, okay, then that's still kibbud av va'em to listen to them, but only if there's no counter mitzvah that I would be violating in the process. In other words, for a Baruch Ber, even the non-tangible fulfilling a parent's wishes, even when they get no direct benefit, is also under the rubric of kibbud av va'em, but it is not the main mitzvah, such that if there's any opposing force that would cause me to do an aveira, I don't have to listen to the parent at all. Ela sheyesh bo gamkein mitzvah, v'rak she'ein ze guf kibbud. Ze ha-kibbud ein bekocho litchos lo saseh, d'le'inin litchos b'inin guf ha'aseh. So, and he says that he believes the Gra says the same thing. So I want to point out the simple pshat of what we've learned up until now before we saw the Birkas Shmuel was that there was never a mitzvah for me to listen to my parents. If they're asking me to do something that is for me and my personal life and has no bearing on them except for bragging rights or nachas rights, I don't have to listen to a parent. But with this chiddush from the Reb Baruch Ber, if I am not doing anything that is causing me a loss, causing me heartache, causing me significant pain, and it's no skin off my nose whether I drive a German car or an American car, then I'm obligated to listen to my mother if she says, I don't want you should drive a German car. That's what Reb Baruch Ber would hold. Now, getting back to this issue of marriage. There's an interesting sefer called Aricha Shulchan Yalkut Chaim. And with this, maybe we'll call it a day because we're running out of time. It was written by Harav Shlomo Korach, who was a big Sephardi posek. He was a Yemenite posek. He was one of the Av Beis-Dins of Bnei Brak, passed away in 2018. And he writes as follows. He says, quotes the Ramah, who says that a son does not have to listen to his father if he says, I don't want you to marry a girl. He says, and I've always paskin this way, that as long as the choice of your son or daughter shidduch is someone who's shomer Torah mitzvot and ba'alei midot, refined people, then a parent has no right to object. V'shagur befi lomar hizaru ha'avos shelo b'mistarim tivke b'tocham bitchem o binchem. Sorry. And I have regularly said this to families who have come to me for advice. Be very careful, parents, that you don't cause private crying to your son or daughter. In other words, they may go along with what you tell them. I don't want you should make this shidduch. But you're going to cause them such heartache that they'll be crying privately. You don't, and I've told this to parents, don't mess up a shidduch. If your child wants this girl, maybe she doesn't come from a great family. Maybe she's a yasoma. Maybe her parents are divorced. Maybe this, maybe that. Don't break a shidduch if your child wants to marry that person. V'ayin shamod b'pischei tshuva, umitzavin olav la'azov beis knesses v'lav lebeis haknesses shelahem. What if a parent tells a child, I don't want you should daven in that shul. I want you to daven in my shul. Okay? But in the child shul, he wants to daven at another place because they daven with better kavana. He has better kavana when he go davens at that other place. Ein tzarech lishmo. Pischei Tshuva also brings, you don't have to listen to a parent. If a child says, I have better kavana davening at that other place, your child doesn't have to listen. V'ayin sham b'bir hagra, shehismich din zeh l'sif tetzvav, sham halach amar lo aviv la'avar al divrei Torah, v'afilu b'mitzvah shel divreim lo yishmalo, v'ayin sham b'divrei birkei Yosef, Pischei Tshuva. It's very consistent with the halacha that if a parent tells you to violate even a rabbinical law, you don't listen to the parent. I want to daven with better kavana. My father's telling me, no, daven with me, you'll have less kavana. That's like asking a person to violate a halach. It's always better to daven with kavan. Benira lanius daiti hadadami lahadadi kiven shahanisuin he mitzvah lekayim priya uravia. He says like this: it seems to me that the reason for the analogy is because getting married is for the purposes of fulfilling the mitzvah of procreation. The ha'av marich lo zman nisuin ad she'yimtza. And the father's saying, don't marry this girl, hold off from marrying her. We'll find you another girl. So during that interim period, who knows if I'm going to find another girl? The father, it may take me another 6 months. He says, "V'chutz mizeh yigram lo lihirhure aver lo hotzi shichva zer levatol kol kama shelo yimahir linase." And think about this. Think about the fact that my son is a nice Jewish boy, and he behaves himself, and he doesn't want to spill his seed gratuitously. He doesn't want to be over on the laws of negia and being with a member of the opposite gender. He's a good boy. And the parent is saying, hold off. The parent is saying, finish your education, finish this, finish that. I mean, think about the averas that the parent is subjecting the child to. He says there's no kibbut ava'im in that kind of situation. And he says, my proof is what it says in the Torah. Torah says that a man is supposed to leave his parents behind and cling to his wife so that they can become one. Never does the Torah express concern. How can a child leave his parents? Who's going to serve them? Who's going to take care of them? And you see, the Torah says, no, that's the way of the world. We want you to leave your parents and go get married. Okay? And therefore, the Torah is telling us that when it comes to marrying the girl who you want to marry, there's no mitzvah of kibbut avayim that can contest that or that can compete with that. And he quotes the Sforno, who seems to say the same thing. The bottom line is that we've seen parameters, at least from the Maharik, that apply to marriage and that could apply to a number of other situations as well. The gray area that still remains, to be sort of resolved is what if a parent says, I don't want, for example, that was the thing I thought of. I don't want you to drive a German car, or I don't want you to live in that apartment building because my nemesis lives in that apartment building, and I don't want you to ever have any encounter with that person, and it's going to bother me that he's your next door neighbor. Okay? So am I obligated to listen to a parent? So the simple understanding of the halacha is no. Anything that's nogeya to my personal life, that's only going to cause my parent aggravation because their child is doing something against their will, the parent doesn't have a right to protest. However, that said, keep in mind the Rav Baruch bears chiddush. I don't know of anyone else who says this, but certainly it's a consideration. If all things are equal, and I can equally get by with following my parents' wishes and not compromising on my life aspirations and my life goals, then it could be that I should try to listen to my parents whenever possible. Yes, Eddie. No. It's all the same, apparently. Apparently, it's all the same. Yes, Dave.
Let's say a couple gets engaged in a Chalaway Sukkot. The parents say, "Oh, it's wonderful, fantastic. We get married in June."
Yeah.
But they said, "But we want to get married." Like,
yeah.
We want to get married in
we
the fall.
we can't wait until June.
June is the
Okay. So I have a case I'm dealing with. Parents, the kids have been dating for 3 years. Finally, the girl said, I can't wait that long. The boy said, I can't wait that long. They're Shomer Nagia. They're good kids. And finally, the son said, I figured out how I'm going to be able to marry the girl this coming winter. And the parents said, no, it's got to be in 2024 in the summer. And if you go against our wishes, we're not participating in the wedding. So they come to me and ask the shaila, so what's the psak? You're not mechuyev to listen to your parents. First of all, what the parents are doing is so horribly wrong, just unbelievably wrong, But besides that, what is the child's obligation to his parents? Listen, we always try to make shalom in those cases. And what we would try to do is reason with the parents, try to find some compromise, try to work things out. That's the pastoral part. That's the counseling part. But if push comes to shove, and we have to know what the psak halacha is, and it's especially what's ironic is that the parents try to guilt the child and say, "Oh, you're a terrible child. You don't fulfill the mitzvah of kibbut avayim. You don't listen to us." So now you have some ammunition, right? Now you can show the parents that, what are you talking about, kibbut avayim? This is completely out of the realm of kibbut avayim. Don't invoke that to guilt your child. You're totally misinterpreting the halacha. Okay. Anyway, much more to discuss. We'll hold it here.